The first type of zone I want to demonstrate is the primary zone, and then show you how the secondary zone actually connects to it to have that read-only copy. The first thing I'm going to do is go to Tools, and I'm going to open DNS from my administrative tools lists. Right now I have two forward lookup zones. The _ MSDCS, that's the Active Directory records, and I have the zone for my domain, rtsnetworking.com. Neither of those did I create, they just automatically exist when you install Active Directory. What I want to do is create a new zone. So I'm going to right click this forward lookup zone, and I'm going to choose New Zone. I'm just going to click Next in the wizard. Now it says, what zone type do you want? Primary, secondary, stub. This checkbox at the bottom says store the zone in Active Directory. So this can be a little confusing. At first glance, this looks like you're creating a primary zone, but you're not. If you leave this box checked, store the zone in Active Directory, you are actually creating an Active Directory integrated zone. Now, you can only select this box, as they say here, only if DNS server is a writable domain controller. So if this were not a domain controller, you would see this option here, but the checkbox would be grayed out and you just would not be able to select it. But I just want a primary zone, so I'm going to deselect that, store the zone in Active Directory. Well, I'm going to choose Next. Now it says, what do you want to name the zone? I'm going to name this Atlantis.local. No reason I chose that name, I just like the name Atlantis, but it needs to be in that format. Name.extension. I'm going to choose Next. Now it says it's going to create a new file with this name. Now, where that file goes, I'm going to go to File Explorer, and I'm just going to open this PC, and I'm going to click on the C drive, Windows, System 32 is in the list, and when I hit D, it automatically drops down to the D folders, but you'll see DNS is in the list. So when I click on that, I can see right now I have this rtsnetworking.com and I have this _ MSDCS. Those are the two zones I have right now. What's going to happen is this is going to create a file named atlantis.local.dns, and it's going to put it in this folder when we're done with the wizard. So your DNS zone is a literal text file. And it even gives us that path here. It says system root, that's C Windows, system root, system32 DNS. Now, you could also use an existing file. What that would mean, if I wanted to migrate from one DNS server to another, you could simply copy that file. The server I'm on right now is 2019. If you already have a 2016 DNS and you simply want to migrate it from 2016 to 2019, one easy way to do that is to simply open this location, that Windows System32 DNS, copy that file to your new server. Then when you create your new zone, just choose existing and browse out and specify the name of that file. But we want to create a new file. So I'm going to click Next. This dynamic update. Right now it says do not allow dynamic updates. The other option is allow both non-secure and secure. A dynamic update means that the computer can register its own record in DNS. So if I join a computer to the domain and the computer is named RTS Client 1 and it has an IP address, the computer would simply go to DNS and say, DNS, I'm letting you know I need to register. This is my name, this is my address, and DNS automatically creates a host A record. If the IP address changes on that computer tomorrow, the computer goes back to DNS and says, hey, DNS, I'm letting you know I'm RTS Client 1 and I have a new address. Update my record. And DNS will, if you allow dynamic updates. If you do not allow dynamic updates, that would mean somebody has to go to DNS and they have to create a host A record for every computer you ever join to your domain. If an IP address changes on a computer, they have to manually go update their record. That's practically impossible. So almost always we would allow dynamic updates. Now with the primary zone, notice it says allow both non-secure and secure. They could have worded this so much better. A secure dynamic update means your computer is a member of the domain. A non-secure update means your computer is not a member of the domain. You could be an iPhone, an Android, an iPad. You could be a Windows computer joined to a work group or Mac OS or Linux or anything like that. So this really could have said allow all computers to dynamically register. Now above, notice there's an option that says allow only secure dynamic updates, says recommended for Active Directory. This option would mean it will only create a host A record for you if your computer belongs to the Active Directory domain. But it says this is only available for Active Directory integrated zones. So that's one of the benefits of the Active Directory integrated over the primary secondary zone concept. And you can change this at any time. So right now, my two options: do not allow dynamic updates. You got to create every record by hand, or allow all dynamic updates from all devices that ever connect to your network. Well, I'm going to say do not allow for now. I mean, it's easy to change that after the fact if you need to. But I'm going to choose next and finish. I see Atlantis.local shows up in the list. If I go back to that folder, you can now see Atlantis.local.dns shows up as a file in that location. So that is the zone file itself. Pretty interesting how it actually works. Now in Atlantis.local, you could go create like a new host A record for, I'm going to say RTS-PC1. And give it some IP address. So now RTS-PC1 is in that Atlantis.local zone. If I go back to that file, the Atlantis.local.dns, you can actually double click on this file, and I'm going to open it. So I'm going to say try an app on this PC, and I'm going to choose Notepad. And I'll say OK. That is the record I just created. RTS-PC1. Now it says A, but it means host A record. That's the IP address we just defined. So your entire DNS zone is actually a readable text file down under C Windows System 32 DNS. Now, not often would you have a need to actually go read the file. It's just neat how it actually works. And understanding how this part works, I just think it makes the concept of DNS much more straightforward and easier to learn. So that zone is created. I have a primary zone. Now, if I want to create a secondary zone, a read-only copy of this on another server, the first thing I have to do, I'm going to go to the properties of Atlantis.local. There is a zone transfers tab that shows up. So you'll see it has this allow zone transfers, and I have three options. I could say allow zone transfers to any server, only to servers listed on the name servers tab. Now that's the default. The name servers tab is actually on the same property sheet. I could simply go to add, and I could put RTS serve 1 here. That would work. Now if I go back to zone transfers, the other option, only to the following servers, and you could edit this, and you could just specify the name or IP address. So I'm going to just put the IP address, 192.168.1.251. Now, it does say the server with this IP address is not authoritative for the required zone. It's supposed to say that right now because it's not actually configured. So that looks like an error message, but it is not an error message. Now I'm just going to click OK, and that is set up. I am done on the primary. Now I'm going to switch to the secondary. Now, I do have some options to switch to the secondary. One of those, I can right-click my DNS server here, and there's an option to connect to DNS, and I could specify RTS SVR1, and I could just say OK, and it's going to show up in the list. And I could now remotely create the zone here, and it would totally work. Just for dramatic effect, when I initially configure this, I just kind of like to do it by going to the other machine itself, but it's the same configuration either way. So I'm going to go to RTS serve 1, and I'm just going to connect in and open DNS from my tools. Now for the forward lookup zone, I'm going to right click New Zone. This time I'm going to choose Secondary. And actually, before I even do that, notice Store the Zone in Active Directory is grayed out and not an option. That's because this is not a domain controller, so it's not even possible to select this. It won't be available. But Secondary is what we want. So I'm going to click Next after I choose Secondary. Now the name is Atlantis.local. Now you have to use the same name that you defined in the primary. Has to be the same name in the secondary. That is what really binds these two things together. So Atlantis.local it is. Here it says for the master DNS server, type the IP address or the name. The address is 192.168.1.250. You'll see that shows up as OK. Now I'm actually going to click that and delete. And I'm going to enter RTS-DC1. An issue here. Most networks do not use IP version 6 in their environment. Now, we will disable IP version 6 eventually, but we did not disable it yet. So notice I cannot click Next, even though it says that is correct. The 192.168.250, it says IPv6 address found for the DNS name. It says no IPv6 address was found for that name. So in an instance like this, you would actually just delete the IPv6. Then it would allow you to click Next. And finish. Now I have my secondary zone. Now when I click on it, ignore the fact that it has an X on it. This will just have to be refreshed a few times because we did this so fast. So I'm going to just right click the server and refresh. Well, now it's working. I now see the RTS-PC1. Now, the way you know that this is actually a secondary zone, if you right-click the record, all you can do is look at the properties. And even the properties are grayed out. So there's no way you could add a new record or delete. If I right-click, your only options are to like reload it or transfer from master. There's no new host A record or anything like that. If I go to the properties of the zone itself, it will tell you that the zone type is secondary. So we know this totally works. Just like in the graphic we described, I could now have my primary and my main location. You have a branch office, and you could now put the secondary in that branch office. Pretty fascinating concept. Now, notice it does have the record for the RTS-PC1. The stub zone, same type of creation. So what I'm going to do is delete Atlantis.local. So that was our secondary. I'm going to right-click New Zone again. And this time I'm going to choose a stub zone instead of secondary. And I'm going to name it Atlantis.local. It's going to create a file. It wants the name or address. So that's of the master server. So we'll enter that same 192.168.1.250, or you could use RTS-DC1 if you wanted to use the name instead. But I'm going to click Next and finish. Now when I open Atlantis.local, okay, it's working. Notice there is no RTS-PC1 because the stub zone does not actually contain client records. You're not going to see a host A or host quad A record show up. You're only going to see records related to the DNS servers themselves. So I would have like the name server record, the start of authority record, and eventually what you'll see in here that'll show up after a few minutes would be a host A record for RTS-DC1. But that's it. You're not going to see records for all the computers you join to your domain. So the way they work is different, but how they created is really the same other than you click the radio button for stub instead of secondary.